Chris Hensley is a registered representative of Cambridge Investment Research, Inc., a broker-dealer member of FINRA SIPC, investment advisor representative of Cambridge Investment Research Advisors, Inc., a registered investment advisor. Cambridge and Houston First Financial Group are not affiliated.
The Houston Midtown chapter of the Society for Financial Awareness presents Money Matters with your host, Christopher Hensley.
Good morning, everybody. You're listening to Money Matters on KPFT Houston. I'm Chris Hensley, and the time is now 11 a.m. Still got to get used to that. After 4 years, we have moved our time slot from 10 a.m. to 11 a.m., so still getting the hang of that. But let's get right to our topic for today. Our ego and its accompanying sense of nagging self-doubt as we work to be bigger, better, smarter, and more in control is one affliction we all share. And while our ego claims to have our best interest at heart, in its never-ending pursuit of attention and power, it sabotages the very goals it's set to achieve. Our guest today is Dr. Mark Epstein. He has written his newest book, Advice Not Given, A Guide to Getting Over Yourself. So please stay tuned. Keep listening. If you are a long-time listener, you know we always we always use the first few moments of the show just to give you a look at what's going on in the Gulf Coast region in Houston when it comes to financial literacy, any calendar of events, anything's going on here in the city. And right now we are getting ramped up and getting ready for a couple of different things. Houston Money Week, which takes place in April. It is Houston's answer to Financial Literacy Month, although this is something that is offered to low income, moderate income, really anybody across the board. We bring financial literacy classes free of charge, tax prep through our VITA program. All of this is brought out. This goes all through the city. Originally 10 years when we started Houston Money Week, it was a small group of nonprofits, local city government, schools. It has now expanded to over 200 different organizations that are involved. So we are getting ramped up and getting started. We actually started getting ready for 2018 in November of 2017. But I do want to encourage you, if you are interested in going to free financial literacy classes, workshops, events, the calendar is now active, and that's at our website, www.houstonmoneyweek.org. With that, in addition to that, the station, the radio station, KPFT, we will be kicking off a fundraiser on March 1st. It will go all the way from March 1st to March 21st, and so I'm just giving you a quick sneak peek of that. This will be the first time that they are giving us a goal on the HD side as well, so kind of a sneak peek at that. With that, I'd like to go ahead and get Mark on the line here so we can make sure that we have the most time to spend with him. Mark, are you there?
I'm here.
Excellent. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Hey, you're very welcome.
And I'm super excited to talk with you. We had Dan Harris on a couple of years ago when he wrote the book 10% Happier, and we talked about you then. So we are excited to talk to you about your newest book, Advice Not Given. Now, I want to share a little bit about you with listeners. Mark Epstein is a psychiatrist in private practice in New York City and the author of a number of books about the interface of Buddhism and psychotherapy, including Trauma of Everyday Life, Thoughts Without a Thinker, and Going to Pieces Without Falling Apart. He received his undergraduate degree and medical degree from Harvard University. Mark, once again, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
So tell me a little bit, why did you write Advice Not Given?
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned Dan Harris to start with, and maybe some of your listeners will remember him. Dan Harris is a newscaster on ABC. He does Good Morning America and Nightline, but he had a panic attack while on air, started garbling his language and just lost it in front of millions of people. And kind of sheepishly, at the advice of his wife, he ended up coming to me, not as a patient, but more as a friend, to learn something from me about meditation, about mindfulness, about Buddhism, about various ways that I have found in my life to help calm anxiety. And I tried to communicate to him what I had learned, and it helped him a lot. And that inspired me in a way to be a little bit more upfront with everything that I've learned from the psychology of Buddhism, I guess I would say, from my explorations in the East. Even though I'm a Harvard-trained psychiatrist and I see patients in my office, I don't always leave with the meditation-related material. So that experience with Dan and with a couple of other personal experiences with people I cared about inspired me to write this book, Advice Not Given, the advice that I've been, in a way, holding back a little bit from the people that I care about.
So, having read the book, I love it. There is so many different, there's such a broad range of different things that you touch upon. So it's kind of well, let's see, where do we start? So can we start with the ego? How you approach the ego in this book?
Sure. Well, maybe a little background would be helpful. I'm a Western trained psychiatrist. I do psychotherapy with people, but I was actually interested in Buddhism and traveled in Asia years before I went to medical school to learn about antidepressants and psychotherapy and whatever. So I was in the unusual position of really knowing both worlds, both approaches to dealing with the mind, to dealing with anxiety, and to dealing with the ego. It's so my father was a Western-trained academic physician. He was chairman of the Department of Medicine at one of the Harvard hospitals, and he was really not interested in any of my more spiritual approaches until at the age of 84, he came down with a malignant brain tumor, the same cancer that John McCain now has and that Ted Kennedy died from. And by the time they found it in my father, it was in the silent part of his brain. So he was still working, doing research, seeing patients, and so on. But it was too late to really do anything treatment-wise for it. So he knew he only had a short time to live, as did I. And I realized, this is the other personal story that I wanted to tell you about. I realized that I had never really had a conversation with my father about meditation, about the ego, about mindfulness, about anything spiritual. He was a scientist and just wasn't interested. He was proud of my work, but not interested in that aspect of things. But I had the sudden realization that maybe I'd been shielding him from all of this, and maybe it would be helpful. Because when we're dying, we have to let go of our egos. Maybe it's kept us going through life, but it can't keep us going forever. So I called him from my office and said to him, I don't know if you want to hear about this or not, but here's what I maybe understand from what I've learned from my study of Buddhist thought, that there's a feeling inside of you where you haven't really changed over the years. How you feel to yourself when you're 20, 40, 60, or 80 it really hasn't changed that much. But if you try to find that feeling of who you are, it's kind of transparent. You can't really isolate it. I said, but what the Buddhists seem to say is that if you can learn to relax your mind into that space, that's not the ego, that you can ride that feeling out when you die, as the body falls apart and the ego dissolves, that you're still you in a certain way. And my father was very nice. He said, "Okay, darling, I'll try." and that was really the last conversation that we had. But so the ego, the ego is something that we need, but it doesn't need to define us. And we can have a better life if we learn what it's useful for and where we don't need it. And that's something I try to convey to my patients in their therapy with me, as well as to my dad and to Dan Harris.
So part of this is there's the discussion of the ego, but there's also coming to terms with being able to give advice or coming across as an expert or even being useful. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. Well, the ego is a wonderful servant, but a terrible master. And most people, we're terribly uneducated about the ego. It comes upon us around the age of 3 when our mind starts to kick in and we realize, oh, I'm a separate person here and I have to cope with, this life, my parents and school and other kids and everything. And then we become, completely identified with the ego, and we're looking out for ourselves, and we feel, like it's us against the universe kind of feeling. But there are, it's good to know what the ego is useful for and how it gets in the way. And a lot of what Western psychotherapy actually is good for, and a lot of what meditation teaches, is how to turn the ego more into a servant, how to make it work for us rather than dominating us and running us around, endlessly searching for praise and trying to avoid blame. So I try to help people learn to cope with the changes that inevitably come upon us in life. We can't control everything, and we have to learn when to gracefully surrender and when to try to take control.
One of the I'm looking at my notes that I made here when I was I cheated. I listened to the audio version when I was listening.
Just as good. I wrote the book trying to write it in a speaking voice.
You narrated
so
it, so
people could just absorb it naturally.
But one of the notes I made was you used the term marketing of mindfulness when you talked about your using meditation in your practice and some of the expectations that people have. You said there's no silver bullet. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. Well, as a psychiatrist, I'm very familiar with how much people are looking for a magical cure for whatever it is that ails them, for their anxiety, for their sense of unworthiness, for their sense of personal inadequacy, for their depression. And 20 or 30 years ago, when Prozac first came on the market, there was a real rush to Prozac. A few people got help from Prozac that they had never received from anything else, from any kind of therapy, any kind of medication, but a whole lot of people tried to take Prozac in the hope that it would magically cure them, and all they got was side effects, So there's something similar these days in the way that people are looking to meditation, looking to mindfulness as, oh, this is the thing that I've been missing, this is the practice that's going to cure me, this is what's going to make me normal, and the placebo effect is a very real phenomenon. So a lot of times people feel better at first and then slowly disappointed because the gains are not holding. So I try to caution people right from the beginning that there is rarely a magic bullet, that meditation is certainly not that it's a practice really for life that helps you accept yourself as you are, all the difficult aspects of yourself as well as maybe the wonderful aspects that you haven't paid enough attention to. But that it's a real thing, mindfulness, but it only helps a little bit. That's why I like Dan Harris's book title, 10% Happier. and it only really helps if you do it. So it's there, and it can make a little bit of a difference for some people. That's all.
I'm going to jump around just a little bit. In the way that the book is structured, there's 8 different paths that you touch upon all of these different topics. One of the paths, I'm going to fast forward a little bit here. One of the topics, our chapters, our pathways, is called Right Livelihood. We've had several shows where we talked about conscious capitalism or kind of the ethical side of money. And so when I listened to that section, it kind of spoke to me there. Can you tell me a little bit about what right livelihood is?
Sure. Well, first, to understand there are 8 major chapters in the book, and I made each chapter after one limb or one rung of what the Buddha described as the Eightfold Path. So the Eightfold Path was the Buddha's way in his psychology of saying, here's how to put what I'm teaching into practice in life. So it's not all about meditation. 2 or 3 of the limbs are about meditation, but 2 of them are about conceptual understanding, and 3 of them are about how to be in the world. And one of those is right livelihood, which you're asking about. So the classical approach to right livelihood is to say you shouldn't make your money doing anything that is causing harm to other people, other beings, or to the world. So in the Buddha's time, which was 2,500, 2,600 years ago, he was cautioning against making money by selling arms, by selling drugs, by running prostitutes, they weren't yet mining or raping the earth, but those kinds of activities would be the classic ones that right livelihood was warning against. I tried to turn all of these things, so how could we actually apply them in our regular lives doing the jobs that we do? And so I was exploring that, really, is all I could do in the book. And one of the things that I came to is that if we only focus, as many people do in our world, on equating our self-worth with how much money we're making, then we're missing one essential aspect of the happiness or the meaning that livelihood can give us. That's the real way to feel better about yourself or to feel happier is to somehow give to others. And that doesn't mean that we all have to work in nonprofits, or that we all have to work in the service industry, but that as we work in whatever field we're working in, not to negate the value of making money, which we all need, but as we do our work, as we have our livelihood, to pay attention to how we are interacting with the other people in our lives, because when all is said and done and we're facing our own death, what matters is how we have given, not how much we've taken. And that is important even while we're having to go to work every day and, support our families or whatever.
I love that. I work a lot as a financial advisor. I work a lot specifically with retirees. And so what happens is a lot of times when people leave their job that they've been doing 20 or 30 years, their social network is part of that job. There's almost a mourning period where they are no longer there. Their identity is not defined by their work, and if they didn't have any additional passions, they didn't, weren't excited about their family, the other things, then it's almost like they're mourning. And so it's interesting. When I heard that, it kind of fell into line with some of the things that I've seen. So I'm going to go back a little bit. I think this was under the right view section, but one of the things that I wrote down was go towards the things that you fear most. Can you give me a little bit about what that's about?
Go towards the things that you feel the most. Well, there's a big tendency in in our culture to be wary of feelings in general. To be sense our emotional lives as somehow dangerous, and to use both psychotherapy and meditation, exercise, whatever, to kind of damp down difficult emotional feelings. And I, as a therapist and so on, I'm against that. My theory is that the more we familiarize ourselves with the complexity of our emotional lives, the more whole and the more real we can feel, both in our work and in our family life, in our intimate life. So one of the things I'm trying to do, both in my writing and in the work I do individually with people, is to create an environment where they can familiarize themselves with the intensity of what's going on inside them emotionally. And then they can bring that, what they learn about themselves, even if it's, it can be on the scary side, but they can bring that to their interactions with other people. So I'm not sure if that's what I was talking about in the phrase that you're remembering from that chapter, but that's been a dominant theme in my work.
So, and I have another note here. I hope this doesn't throw you for a loop here, because it's along the same lines. Moms that hate babies. So I think this was along when people have a difficult time dealing with something they think maybe they're not supposed to think, and you use this as a device to. Can you tell us a little bit about this story? Yeah.
Well, any mother of an infant can attest to the fact that an infant is full of emotion, both anger and love in its most primitive form is kind of fused in the way a baby will reach for what it needs from the mother, so that there's a kind of ruthlessness in a baby that a mother naturally attends to and responds to. So I believe that our more developed emotions of both love and hate, of anger and attachment, are all rooted in a kind of a single fused primitive childhood feeling. So even as adults, we both love and hate the people we need the most. You see that in marriage. You see it in all kinds of very important relationships, and you see it in particular in a parent with a young child. But we're conditioned to feel that that's somehow wrong, that a mother should never be angry with or have hateful feelings for her baby. But most parents do. And when you're constantly pushing away a natural feeling, then a kind of rigidity builds up around the heart or around the soul. So a person creates a sort of false persona, like, oh, I'm just loving all the time kind of thing. But the child reads that as fake, and it creates a barrier or a gulf between people that doesn't really need to exist, because the love ultimately will always triumph over the anger if the anger is given enough room to be made conscious.
Very interesting. I was trying to explain that to my wife last night after reading that or listening to that, and she's like, "Now come again." And then it's like, I wish I could have described it the way you just did.
Well, tell her she can hate you a little bit, and it's okay.
And it's okay. Yes. So let's kind of go back a little bit to meditation here. One of the paths, and I guess the last one in the book, is called right concentration. What can you tell us about that?
So concentration is sort of like the secret weapon of meditation. Mostly in our regular lives, we're relatively distracted compared to what we're capable of. Maybe if we go to the movie theater and we really lose ourselves in the film, there's a sense of what concentration can do. Someone who's playing sports, like a really good basketball player, will talk about entering a flow state, where they can sink three-pointers after three-pointers, and they're in a concentrated state when they're doing that. People who go to the gym and aren't, like watching CNN while they're on the treadmill, if they just pay attention to what's happening in their physical bodies, they may enter some approximation of that kind of flow state that maybe if you're watching the Olympics, you see some of those incredible ice skaters or athletes, who are embodying that. But that ability to focus the mind in an undistracted way, to concentrate the mind, is something that the practitioners of meditation and yoga in the East have been doing for thousands of years. And they have built up what's sometimes called an inner science that is like the counterpoint to our science of the material world. They really understand what the mind is capable of if you practice disciplining it in a certain way. And the concentration, the key to evoking all of the tranquility and calm and relaxation and so on that is traditionally ascribed to meditation, a lot of that comes out of this simple practice of concentration. So I talk about it in the book as like, this opens up the mystery. We don't really know what we're capable of, what our minds are capable of, but as we bring them together, as we bring our minds into a focused place, it actually opens up a vastness that we didn't know was there inside of us.
Mark, we are right here at the end of the show. I'd love to keep going here, but we're bumping towards the end of the show there.
Maybe that's a good place to stop then, with how little we're really in touch with what we're capable of.
That's a perfect place to stop right there.
It's the ego that keeps us out of touch, which is why we want to learn to let it go a little bit.
Absolutely. For listeners who'd like to find out more about Mark, the book is available on Amazon, and his website, Mark Epstein. Let's find it here.
MD, MarkEpsteinMD.com. There's a good Facebook page, too, under the same name, Mark Epstein, MD.
If you're listening to the podcast version, we will have links to that website as well as the book. Mark, are there any closing thoughts as well as what we just said that you'd like to leave us with?
No, I think that's enough. The sense of mystery that can enliven our lives when we learn to not be totally run by our egos, that's a good place to leave it.
Thank you so much, Mark. I really enjoyed it, and you have a great weekend.
Thank you so much. You too. Bye-bye.
You've been listening to KPFT Houston.
Thanks for listening to today's episode of Money Matters Podcast. If you enjoyed the show, visit us on the web at www.moneymatterspodcast.com. Drop us a line on SpeakPipe on the right-hand corner. It will receive any voicemails, questions, thoughts, concerns that you have about the show. In addition to this, we recently launched a Patreon campaign. Click on the Donate Now tab to hit the tip jar and find out what Patreon's campaign is all about.